Solo Graffiti versus CREW Graffiti. Which is better? Who's to say? I feel like when most people start out in graffiti, they aren't super connected to the community. And that's totally okay. That's exactly how I was too, and probably to a certain degree that's how I still am. And I also feel like a lot of people just assume that graffiti is better with more people, when in reality there's actually a lot of pros and cons to doing graffiti solo and doing graffiti with a crew. And today I am here to tell you the pros and cons of both ways of doing graffiti, because there are many pros and cons of both ways. I'll start off by telling you the pros and cons of doing solo graffiti specifically first, because a lot of people just plain think, like I said, doing graffiti in crews is better, and that simply ain't the case, at least not all the time. And after that, I want to tell you the golden rule of solo graffiti. This is the one golden rule that has kept me on my feet and safe doing solo graffiti in the past for 10 years plus. So these pros and cons of solo graffiti are for all of you guys out there who got into graffiti the same sort of way I did, either purely by chance or by seeing it in your area and just not really having an into the graffiti community at the start. We'll start off with the positive, start off with a couple pros here. One of the biggest pros of solo graffiti is that you are simply less visible. When you're moving through the street, in a freight yard, one single person should be, as long as you're not being a complete idiot, a lot less visible than a group of 4 or 5 guys trying to move through the freight yard. I mean, seriously, like even just myself walking down the freight line, hearing my footsteps on those stones,
because there are plenty of like artistic concepts that you do have to pay are close enough to being rules that they might as well be rules. Is
just me alone, I get irritated enough at that noise. Multiply that by ×5, ×6 when you're with your buddies out there, and oh, it's a heck of a lot of noise. There is no way around it. And that sort of leads into my second pro of solo graffiti, which goes 2 ways. A, it's that you yourself are quieter, and B, because you're quieter, you can hear more of the environment around you, which is always a good thing. No matter how organized and cohesive a graffiti unit is doing any kind of mission, you're always quietest when you're alone. You don't have to communicate anything to anyone, and you can constantly gather information just by listening. You may think a lot of graffiti crews are pretty quiet until you get out there and you've got, again, your 5 or 6 guys all painting with their spray cans. You hear 6 different spray cans from 6 different spots around you on the freight in front of you, beside you, and behind you. It's just, you can't hear anything outside of your little bubble, and that can get pretty irksome if you're just not used to that environment, I guess. So to sum that up, really, just don't underestimate the value of having a smaller footprint as a solo graffiti artist. But I'm certainly not trying to say there aren't cons of doing graffiti solo, and I'm going to mention the one main con before I reveal to you my golden rule of doing graffiti solo. And that main con, which is probably the first one that comes to everyone's mind, is simply just you have no lookout at all. It's just you. You have to be the eyes of the piece and the operation, I guess, as well. There is no better substitute than just having your own little capital Q there to keep an eye out for you when you're trying to paint a quick panel in the yard or something like that. And because of that, if you are doing solo stuff, you do have to stick to those more chill spots most of the time. It's just simply not smart to be painting those high traffic areas if you don't have a couple guys to keep a lookout for the crew. But that con is no match for my personal golden rule of solo graffiti, and again, this is the golden rule that I tell anyone who is asking me, Sciz, I'm new to graffiti or new to graffiti in my area, how do I find people to paint with? And what I always tell them is the golden rule. And that is simply, it's better to be painting with no one at all than be painting with people that you can't trust. And not to toot my own horn or anything too much, but I think that's a very underrated mindset of graffiti in general. I mean, honestly, think about it. The more uncertainty there is in any graffiti situation, the less control you have over how that is going to turn out. And not having control is generally not great when you're doing something like graffiti. So the reality is, if you just go bombing with Joe Blow, whoever wants to go bombing, then you're not going to be operating as a cohesive unit. You don't know how the other people operate, and you're probably going to get into some bad situations. And it's not even necessarily that you will get into some bad situations, it's what happens when you do. The difference between an actual cohesive graffiti crew and just a few people bombing together is not if bad situations happen, it's the results of the bad situations. Is everyone able to get their stuff together and scram really fast, or is it just absolute chaos? And that's not to knock CREW Graffiti. We're gonna get to the pros of the CREW stuff in a second, I promise, but just think of it this way. How likely is it that if you're bombing with a few people you don't really know, how likely is it that they are going to have your back or not leave you out to dry when a bad situation hits? That's all I'm saying. But if you are a big proponent of Solo Graffiti and you think I've missed a few super key points, hey, feel free to leave a comment. I can't fit everything in one video. I approach things differently than you might as well. I'm sure everyone would love to see your comments. So hey, leave it down there. But there are plenty of great things about being a part of a crew and CREW Graffiti scenes as well, and although I've been most comfortable in the past with Solo Graffiti myself, these are the things that I've noticed I've been missing out on the most, and really speak to why it's important and nice to sometimes have graffiti crew missions to go on. You'll notice that throughout these pros, I'm going to be using 1UP as an example a lot because they are arguably one of the most, if not the most successful graffiti crew in the world. The first pro of crews is more eyes means you got more visibility, and you can do some higher risk spots if the crew is up for that kind of thing. This is because more eyes means more potential to notice things a little bit sooner, so that if there is something that needs to be noticed, you have that extra minute to get everyone out. And another big main pro of graffiti crews is that you can take on those big graffiti missions that are simply not possible with just one or two guys. For example, we're looking at 1UP here again, and there is no way that a crew that is any less organized would be able to pull off a train hit anywhere near 5 minutes or less, like you're seeing there. It is the sheer size of the crew and their organization within the crew that made that train possible for 1UP. And a bit of a less obvious pro that I always feel I'm missing out on as a solo graffiti artist that crews get the benefit of is there's just more hands to carry all the stuff that you need. I mean, one guy can bring the milk crate, one guy can bring the bolt cutters, one guy can bring whatever this thing is to open the thingamabob to go down into the subway. I don't know what that's called. I'm not up on bullet trains, believe it or not. But for those of you who got into graffiti through maybe a family member or a friend, or just have always had an into the graffiti community and into a graffiti crew, definitely also leave a comment letting everyone know more of the benefits that I didn't touch on or the cons of CREW Graffiti. I've been around long enough to sort of get the gist of the main reasons that people do graffiti in crews, obviously, but as someone who's always been happy not representing, I'd love to hear from some more experienced CREW Graffiti writers more of the benefits that you guys get. But that being said, if you want to know not who to paint with, but where to paint, or more specifically where not to paint, then you can check out this video on screen right now that we did on the channel about the top 5 fastest places graffiti gets buffed. I hope to see you over there soon. You can always subscribe to see more of the content here on the channel. Until then, peace.